Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. A familiar arrival ***. Evelyn Carter pulled her long auburn hair into a tight ponytail, the heat of the colony's twin suns prickling her skin. It was her third year on Lumen 4, a verdant world where Earth's distant outpost had grown steadily under the watchful gaze of its colonists. Though the research colony boasted cutting-edge labs and lush landscapes, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that her life had become an endless cycle of sterile routines and muted solitude. 3 years ago, Evelyn had left Earth, and a piece of her heart, behind. Her daily routine was interrupted that morning when the colony's proximity alarms howled through the intercom. Evelyn rushed to the observation deck, expecting to see the usual, meteor activity or malfunctioning sensors. Instead, the screens displayed a sight that sent her pulse racing. A sleek, silvery spacecraft, its design unmistakably alien, was descending toward the forest outside the colony perimeter. Her breath caught. Aurelian. Memories flooded her. The Aurelians were an enigmatic race, their presence fleeting yet unforgettable. They had made first contact years ago but disappeared after tense diplomatic negotiations. Evelyn had spent those months working closely with an Aurelian named Kale. He had been unlike anyone she'd ever met, sharp-witted, deeply intuitive, and surprisingly tender. She fell for him, a connection as improbable as it was electric. Then, just as suddenly as the Aurelians had appeared, Kale vanished without a word. "Dr. Carter," a voice snapped her out of her trance. One of her colleagues, a junior researcher named Malik, was waving to her from across the room. "Do we report it to command?" "No," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll check it out first. It could be a false alarm." The spacecraft rested in a clearing surrounded by towering emerald trees. Its hull shimmered faintly as if alive, and a low hum emanated from its core. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the scanner in her hand as the ship's door hissed open. She froze when a familiar figure stepped out. Go. His silvery skin was marred by dark streaks, injuries perhaps, but his graceful movements were unmistakable. The faint glow of his markings pulsed in rhythm with his shallow breathing. He staggered forward, locking his piercing violet eyes onto hers. "Kale?" she whispered, disbelieving. "Did you miss me, human?" he said, his voice both tired and amused before collapsing to the ground. Back at the colony, Evelyn kept Kale in her private lab, bypassing the colony's protocols. She worked tirelessly to stabilize him, her mind racing with questions. Where had he been all these years? Why had he come back now? When Kale finally stirred, his recovery was quick, too quick for a human. Within hours he was sitting upright, his violet gaze scanning the sterile lab. You shouldn't be here," Evelyn said, arms crossed. "You have a lot of explaining to do." Kale smirked, his expression both familiar and infuriating. "I thought you'd be happy to see me." "I thought you were dead," she shot back. "I almost was," Kale admitted, the humor fading from his tone. "But I came back because I need your help." Evelyn's anger simmered beneath her curiosity. "Help with what?" Kale hesitated, his gaze darkening. "Something is coming, Evelyn. Something that threatens both my people and yours. I need you to trust me, like you once did." Her heart ached at his words, but trust didn't come easily after years of silence. "You're going to have to do a lot better than cryptic warnings if you want my help." Kale's expression softened. "I will. But first I need to know, did you miss me?" An unlikely reunion ***. Evelyn sat alone in her apartment, the dim light of her desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Her fingers brushed the edge of a faded photograph, its edges frayed from years of handling. The image showed her and a man, *Kale*, standing on a rocky outcrop, the backdrop of a distant star system swirling above them. They had been so young then, so full of hope, so full of life. Her fingers trembled as she traced the outline of his face, the memory of his smile, his voice, all of it coming back in a rush. She remembered their final moments together before he vanished, the tearful promises of someday, of a future they never got to have. The war had torn them apart and then, just like that, he was gone. As the years passed, Evelyn moved on. She had to. There was no other choice. The world didn't stop for grief. The resistance needed her, humanity needed her. But now, sitting alone in the silence of her apartment, Evelyn realized how much she missed him. How much she had wanted him back. And then, as though the universe had answered her unspoken wish, the doorbell rang. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. The sound came again, this time louder, more insistent. Evelyn slowly stood from her chair, the photograph slipping from her fingers and fluttering to the floor. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, her breath catching in her throat. Who would be at her door at this hour? The resistance was always cautious, making sure to avoid unnecessary attention. She quickly glanced out the window to see if there were any signs of an ambush, but the street was eerily quiet. No guards, no vehicles, nothing out of the ordinary. Still, something felt off. Her hand hovered over the door handle, uncertainty gnawing at her gut. Should she open it? Was it safe? 1,000 questions raced through her mind, but another louder thought broke through the noise. What if it's him? Without fully understanding why, Evelyn's hand moved, turning the handle with a soft click. The door opened slowly and there he stood. Go. The man she had thought she would never see again, the man who had haunted her dreams for years, now standing in the flesh. He looked different, older, more battle-worn, but still the same. His striking green eyes were just as sharp, his dark hair slightly longer, falling into his face. His clothes were more rugged, covered in dust and dirt, as though he had just come from the front lines. But despite the changes, there was no mistaking him. Evelyn, Cale said softly, his voice raw but warm. Did you miss me? The question hung in the air, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She could barely believe what she was seeing. She blinked, trying to clear the haze in her vision, as though he might disappear any second. But he didn't. He was real. She wanted to say something, anything, but her voice betrayed her. Instead, she threw herself into his arms, the familiar scent of him, earthy and metallic, flooding her senses. The warmth of his embrace, the solid strength of him, was all she had craved, all she had dreamed about for so long. She buried her face in his chest, letting the tears come, knowing this was a moment she would never get back. Cale didn't speak at first. He just held her, his own breath shaky as he let her cling to him. There was so much to say, so much to explain. But for now, in this moment, the silence was enough. Eventually, Evelyn pulled back, wiping at her tear-streaked cheeks. She gave him a shaky smile. I thought I lost you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Cale's lips tightened, and he looked away as though the weight of those words affected him deeply. He opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. Instead, he gently cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. I'm sorry, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I never wanted to leave you like that. But I had no choice. Evelyn nodded, her heart still racing. She had waited so long to hear him explain himself. She had longed for some sort of closure, some sign that he was still alive, still thinking of her. But what he said next sent a chill through her. They're after us, Evelyn. The Zaraka, they're getting closer. They know about you. About us? He stepped back slightly, his brow furrowed with concern. We don't have time to talk. We need to move. Evelyn felt a cold knot settle in her stomach. What do you mean? Who's after us? Cale's eyes darkened as he scanned the street outside, his posture tense. The Zaraka. They've been hunting down anyone who fought against them. And they've found out about you. About everything you've been doing. You've been a target for a long time, Evelyn. The realization hit her like a physical blow. For years, she had been so focused on the resistance, so entrenched in the fight for humanity's survival, that she hadn't realized how much of a target she had become. It was the reason she had cut herself off from everything, why she had gone into hiding. But even that wasn't enough. The Zaraka are after you too? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Cale nodded gravely. Yes. I thought I could stay away, that I could protect you from this. But it's too late. The war is escalating and they know you're the key to ending it. Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine. She had always known there would be no easy escape from the war. But to have it come to her doorstep, to have her past collide so violently with her present, it was overwhelming. Where are we going? She asked, steeling herself for the next steps. Cale's gaze softened, his lips twitching into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can figure this out. I'll explain everything, I promise. But right now, we need to get out of here before they find us. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, her gaze drifting to the photograph of the two of them on the desk. She thought of all the years that had passed, of all the pain, the loss, the emptiness. And now, standing here with him, she could feel the same old connection pulling at her heart. Okay, she said, her voice steady now. Let's go. Cale gave her a nod, then turned to the door, motioning for her to follow. Stay close, he warned, his tone suddenly serious. The Zaraka are ruthless. They'll do whatever it takes to find us. Evelyn nodded, her thoughts racing. She had always been ready for the next fight, but this was something different. This was personal. The truth revealed ***. Evelyn stared at Cale, the faint glow of his silvery skin lighting the otherwise dark lab. His face was the same, sharp and defined, with the same enigmatic violet eyes that had haunted her thoughts for years. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. She could feel it. The years apart had carved a distance between them, one she wasn't sure she could bridge. "You've got 10 minutes, Kale," she said, her voice tight, the words weighed down by years of unanswered questions. "Tell me why I shouldn't just send you back into space." Kale took a deep breath, settling into the chair she had provided him. His eyes flickered toward the far corner of the room, where a holographic map of the planet hung suspended in the air, a reminder of the research colony's ever-watchful eye. "I'm not here for a reunion, Evelyn. I know I don't have the luxury of asking for forgiveness," Kale began, his voice deepening with an uncharacteristic gravity. "When I left, I did it to protect you. To protect Earth." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "Protect us from what?" Kale's gaze turned steely, his gaze never leaving hers. "From them, the Zaraka. They're a rogue faction of my people. A group of extremists who broke away from Aurelian society centuries ago. They have been trying to destabilize the galaxy for years, and their sights are now set on humanity." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "The Zaraka? But I thought they were a myth, just stories passed down by your people to scare children." Kale shook his head slowly. "I wish they were. But they're real. And they're more dangerous than you can imagine." He paused as if measuring his next words carefully. "When I disappeared, I wasn't abandoning you. I was sent to Earth's orbit on a covert mission. I couldn't tell you at the time. Earth's governments were already suspicious of our presence, and any misstep could have led to a war. I had to leave before I could explain." Evelyn clenched her fists, resisting the urge to lash out. "So, all this time you've been working against us? Against me?" "No," Kale responded sharply, his eyes flashing with an intensity that startled her. "I was working for you, Evelyn. The Zaraka began infiltrating your political systems, spreading lies about my people and stirring distrust. I couldn't let them succeed. If they had, they would have forced humanity into a war with the Aurelians and we would have lost." Evelyn's mind raced as the weight of his words settled in. The possibility of interstellar war was something she had studied, something she had feared for years, but the reality of it was still hard to grasp. Her breath grew shallow as the implications sunk in. "I don't believe you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, even though doubt had already begun to creep into her thoughts. "You think I'm supposed to just accept that after all this time, you've been working in the shadows? I don't even know who you are anymore." Kale looked at her, his expression softening, though his features remained as unreadable as ever. "I'm the same person I was before. The one who cared about you. I never stopped caring, Evelyn. I came back because I need you. I need your help to stop the Zaraka from taking Earth." There was a long silence between them as Evelyn tried to reconcile the image of the Kale she had known with the one standing before her now. The sharp, calculated Aurelian diplomat who had been a constant in her thoughts, and the man who was now pleading for her trust again. She couldn't deny that part of her still longed for the connection they once had. But too much had happened and too many years had passed. "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered, the words leaving her lips with more pain than she had expected. Kale's expression hardened once more, but he didn't back down. "I don't expect you to trust me right away. But you need to understand something, Evelyn. We're running out of time. The Zaraka are already on their way and they've been tracking me. If we don't stop them before they make contact with Earth, it could be too late." Evelyn bit her lip, struggling with the storm of emotions inside her. She couldn't turn her back on the possibility of a war that could destroy everything she had worked so hard to protect. And yet, the idea of trusting Kale again after all this time felt like a betrayal to herself. But in the back of her mind, she knew she didn't have the luxury of hesitation. She took a slow, deliberate breath. "What exactly do you need me to do?" Kale's gaze softened as though a weight had been lifted. "I need you to come with me, Evelyn. We need to find the Zaraka's leader and stop them before they can strike. We'll need your expertise, your knowledge of Earth's biology, your understanding of its political systems. You're the one person who can help us navigate this world." Evelyn hesitated. She had spent years working in isolation, studying alien species, and making a name for herself in the scientific community. But this wasn't just about research anymore. This was about survival. "You're asking me to risk everything. Everything I've worked for, everything I've built here," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I'm asking you to save Earth," Kale replied, his tone unwavering. "You once trusted me. I'm asking for that trust again, Evelyn. Please." The words hung in the air like a silent plea. Evelyn could feel the weight of them, the gravity of the situation pressing down on her chest. Her gaze flickered to the console beside her, where her research papers, her life's work, lay untouched. All of it, every discovery, every piece of knowledge she had worked for, seemed suddenly insignificant in the face of the threat Cale had revealed. She knew what she had to do. "I'll help you," she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. "But if we do this, Cale, we're in this together. No more secrets. No more running." Cale nodded, a flicker of something like relief crossing his face. "No more secrets. Together. Into the heart of the storm ****. Evelyn felt the weight of her decision settling in as the ship's engines roared to life. She stood in the small, sterile command room of Cale's spacecraft, surrounded by a sleek, alien technology that hummed with energy. The smooth, metallic walls shimmered under the soft glow of the control panels, casting an eerie light on her and Cale. It had been years since she had been this close to him, but the familiar chill of his presence seemed to have multiplied, an unsettling reminder of how much had changed. "Where are we heading?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of apprehension. Cale's violet eyes flicked to her, his expression unreadable. He stood at the control console, his slender fingers brushing over the holographic interfaces with practiced ease. "We're going to the Obsidian Rift," he replied, his tone businesslike. "It's a hidden location. One of the few places the Zaraka are known to have used as a staging ground for their operations." Evelyn's stomach tightened. The Obsidian Rift was a name that struck fear into the hearts of many, a vast region of space where dark matter clouds obscured navigation and where many ships, both military and civilian, had disappeared without a trace. To go there was to willingly walk into the unknown, into a dangerous void that had swallowed countless lives. "You're telling me the Zaraka are hiding in a place like that?" she asked, struggling to keep the fear from her voice. "How do you even know we'll survive the journey?" Cale met her gaze with a steady look that made her heart race. "I've been there before. I know the risks, Evelyn. We're not going into the heart of the rift just yet, we're heading to one of its fringes. But the Zaraka's main base is deep inside, beyond the reach of most scanners. It's the perfect hiding spot." She hesitated, but her resolve was firm. If there was even a chance of stopping the Zaraka before they reached Earth, then this was the only option. She had trusted Cale once before, and despite the years apart, that trust hadn't completely faded. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Hours later, the ship cut through the outer rim of the galaxy, passing through asteroid fields and ion storms, each more dangerous than the last. Evelyn sat in the cockpit with Cale, watching the stars blur past them as they neared their destination. The tension in the air was palpable, and even Cale, usually so composed, seemed on edge. Evelyn's thoughts were a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. She had left her life on Lumen 4 behind, her research and all she had built for the past 3 years, in pursuit of a war she wasn't even sure would come. She had always known space was dangerous, but this was something entirely different. She was risking everything, her career, her future, and her heart. "Cale," she began, breaking the silence, "you said the Zaraka have been tracking you. Are they tracking us now?" Cale's expression darkened, and he glanced at the ship's monitors, his fingers moving quickly over the controls. "Yes, they know I'm coming. But they don't know where we are yet. We've been using cloaking tech, but I'm not sure how much longer it'll hold." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "How long until they find us?" Cale paused, then met her gaze. "It depends. If they've already set up a perimeter around the rift, we could be in danger sooner than I hoped." Evelyn nodded, trying to stay focused. "Then we need to prepare. What's the plan once we get there?" "We'll infiltrate their base," Cale explained, his voice quiet but firm. "The Zaraka's leader, Varan, is the one we need to eliminate. He's the mastermind behind their strategy to destabilize the galaxy. If we don't stop him, Earth will be just the first target." She processed his words, the weight of the mission settling in. "And you expect me to just walk in there and help you take him down?" Cale's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his gaze intense. "I expect you to do what you've always done, Evelyn. Think. Adapt. You have a brilliant mind, and we'll need it more than ever if we're going to survive this." She couldn't help but feel a flicker of warmth at his words. Despite everything that had happened, despite the years of silence, Cale still saw her for what she was. A scientist, a problem solver. That was the part of him she had always admired, the part of him she had fallen in love with. As the ship approached the fringes of the Obsidian Rift, the darkness of space seemed to deepen, the stars growing more distant and dimmer as they entered the thick, swirling clouds of dark matter. Evelyn could feel the tension in her bones, the heavy anticipation of what awaited them in the void. Kale's fingers moved swiftly over the controls, and the ship's hum shifted, a subtle change that signaled their approach to the rift's outer edge. "We're almost there," Kale murmured. "Stay alert." The ship jerked as it hit a pocket of turbulence. Evelyn gripped her seat as the ship trembled, her heart pounding in her chest. The cockpit screens flickered briefly, and for a moment she thought she saw something on the scanner, a flash of movement, something large and fast. "What was that?" she asked, her voice sharp. Kale's eyes narrowed, his body tensing as he studied the readings. "We've been spotted. They're close." Before Evelyn could respond, a loud bang echoed through the hull, and the ship lurched violently, throwing her forward in her seat. The alarms blared as the ship's systems went haywire. The next few moments were a blur of flashing lights, alarms, and frantic commands. Evelyn did everything she could to assist Kale, helping him maintain control of the ship as they dodged incoming fire from Zaraka interceptors. The small ship shuddered under the impact of the blasts, but Kale's skill kept them alive, weaving through the asteroids and debris with ease. But it was clear that they couldn't outrun the attackers forever. The Zaraka were relentless. "We need to land," Kale shouted over the chaos, his voice cutting through the roar of the engines. "I'm taking us to a safe zone. Get ready." Evelyn's heart raced as she scanned the surroundings. The obsidian rift was a labyrinth of dark clouds, asteroid fields, and shifting gravity wells, perfect for hiding but a nightmare to navigate under fire. She glanced at Kale, feeling the pressure building in her chest. Into the depths ***. The ship plunged through the dense layers of dark matter that obscured the obsidian rift, its engines groaning under the strain as it descended. Evelyn gripped her seat, her knuckles turning white. The turbulence was unforgiving, the very fabric of space seeming to bend and warp around them. Every warning light flashed red, every alarm blared a maddening sound, but Kale's focused hands on the controls kept them steady, barely. "Hold on," Kale barked, his voice taut with concentration. "We're coming in too fast." Evelyn's stomach lurched as the ship veered sharply, narrowly dodging a cluster of asteroids. The outer hull groaned under the impact of a glancing blow, sending a sharp vibration through the cabin. "We're almost there," Kale said, though the exhaustion in his voice was clear. "I can see the landing zone. Just a few more seconds." Evelyn glanced out of the portside window. All she could see was the pitch-black void of space, pierced only by the faintest glimmer of distant stars. Then, as if the darkness parted for them, a jagged ridge of rock emerged, an ancient ruin hidden in the rift's veil. The ship rattled as it adjusted its trajectory, and Evelyn's heart rate quickened. "Brace yourself," Kale shouted. The ship slammed into the landing zone with a heavy jolt, the shocks reverberating through the frame as they touched down with force. The engines sputtered and died, leaving only the oppressive silence of the rift surrounding them. The ship was battered, but it had made it. Kale was already unstrapping himself, moving with an efficiency that betrayed his years of military experience. He turned to Evelyn, his eyes sharp and intent. "We need to move quickly. The Zaraka will be on us soon." Evelyn nodded, unstrapping herself from her seat. As the ship's hatch opened with a soft hiss, the air outside hit her, a strange dry atmosphere that stank of sulfur and decay. The planet's surface was an eerie wasteland, jagged rocks and craters littering the barren landscape. The rift's atmosphere was thick, almost suffocating, and she felt a distinct chill creeping into her bones. She pulled her environmental suit tighter, sealing the helmet with a sharp click. "What exactly are we looking for here?" she asked, adjusting her pack. Kale's violet eyes scanned the horizon, his posture alert. "There's an old underground facility just beneath the surface. It was abandoned centuries ago, but the Zaraka repurposed it as a stronghold. It's their main base on this planet." Evelyn followed Kale as he led the way, their footsteps crunching on the rocky ground. "And what's the plan once we get inside? You're not expecting us to just waltz in and take out their leader, are you?" Kale glanced at her, his lips curling into a faint smile. "No, it won't be that easy. But we can't waste time. Once the Zaraka realize we're here, they'll try to trap us in the rift." The facility came into view as they descended into a canyon, its entrance barely visible amid the jagged rocks. It was concealed by an elaborate force field, the faint hum of energy detectable only when they were almost directly in front of it. "Here we are," Kale muttered, crouching low and checking his weapon, a small pulse rifle he had retrieved from the ship's storage. "We'll need to deactivate the force field before we can get inside." "I'll handle it. You keep watch." Evelyn nodded, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The air around them felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Every instinct told her to be on edge. If the Zaraka knew they were here, this could all be a trap. Kale moved swiftly, his figure blending into the shadows of the canyon as he approached the base's entrance. His fingers flew over a hidden terminal, the soft flickering of alien symbols casting a ghostly glow on his face. The hum of the force field wavered, and then with a final quiet click, it dissipated, leaving the entrance wide open. "We're in," Kale said, turning back to Evelyn. His gaze held a trace of pride, but the seriousness of their mission had erased any lingering warmth in his expression. "Let's go." They entered the facility, their footsteps echoing in the cold, metallic corridors. The walls were covered in alien hieroglyphs and strange machinery, their purpose unclear but undeniably ancient. It was clear the Zaraka had retrofitted the place with their own tech, making it a hazardous mix of forgotten Aurelian design and brutal, functional equipment. Evelyn couldn't help but admire the ingenuity of it all. The way the Zaraka had adapted the facility, twisted it to their needs, it was a chilling reminder of just how dangerous their enemy was. They were not only surviving in this hostile environment, they were thriving. Kale motioned for her to follow as he moved deeper into the labyrinthine structure. "The leader's quarters are ahead. We'll need to be quick." As they rounded a corner, they came to a small, dimly lit chamber. At its center was a large metallic door flanked by armed guards. The Zaraka had clearly anticipated someone might come, but they hadn't expected a direct assault. Kale motioned to the left, signaling for Evelyn to stay hidden behind a stack of crates. He pulled out a small device from his belt and placed it against the wall, triggering a low-frequency pulse that disabled the nearby security cameras. Without missing a beat, he drew his pulse rifle and took down one of the guards with a single shot, the quiet hum of the weapon barely audible in the air. Evelyn watched, her heart pounding in her chest as Kale efficiently dealt with the other guard. The tension was thick, the silence between them only broken by the soft whir of their gear. "Go," Kale whispered. "I'll cover you." Evelyn didn't hesitate. She ran for the door, quickly accessing the console and disabling its locks. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the chamber beyond. Inside, the leader of the Zaraka, Varan, stood at a large control table, flanked by several of his most trusted lieutenants. His imposing figure was a mix of Aurelian features and something darker, more menacing. His black armor gleamed in the low light, and his cold, calculating eyes turned toward them with deadly precision. "So, Kale," Varan's voice boomed, rich with disdain. "You bring a human into my domain? How predictable." Kale stepped forward, his pulse rifle aimed directly at Varan. "This ends now, Varan. Your reign of chaos stops here." Varan chuckled darkly, his fingers dancing over the control panel. "You think you can stop me? You've only just arrived. My plans are already in motion, Kale. You and your human will never leave this place alive." The final stand ***. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the energy systems in the facility echoing like the steady beat of a war drum. Kale's eyes never left Varan as he tightened his grip on the pulse rifle. Evelyn stood to his side, her breath shallow but her mind racing. This was it, the moment they had come for, the confrontation that would determine the fate of Earth and perhaps the galaxy. Varan's piercing gaze locked onto Evelyn for a brief moment, a cold smile curling at the corner of his lips. "A human standing here in my presence. How quaint," he said with venom in his voice. "Tell me, do you truly think you can stop the Zaraka, little human?" Evelyn felt a chill run through her spine but forced herself to stand tall. "We're not here to talk, Varan," she shot back, her voice steady. "We're here to end this." Varan's eyes flickered briefly to Kale, his smile widening. "And you, Kale," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "How far you've fallen. From a respected Aurelian diplomat to a traitor of your own kind. How noble." Kale's jaw clenched, but his resolve remained unshaken. "I haven't fallen. I've risen, Varan. You and your extremists have twisted everything I stood for. You may have been born an Aurelian, but you are no longer one of us. You're a disgrace." Varan chuckled again, his deep voice echoing off the walls of the chamber. "Your ideals are irrelevant now, Kale. The Zaraka are the future. We will burn the old galaxy down and build a new one from its ashes. A galaxy that will kneel before the Zaraka." Evelyn's grip tightened around her own weapon. Kale had told her that this would be their greatest challenge. The Zaraka were more than just rebels. They were an ideology, a movement that had spread far and wide, and their leader was not just a warlord but a charismatic tyrant. "Enough talk," Kale growled, his voice fierce. "You're done." Before Varan could respond, Kale fired, the pulse shot racing toward the leader's position. But Varan was faster. He threw himself to the side with a speed that defied his size, the pulse shot narrowly missing him as it slammed into a nearby wall, sparking the energy grid. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she darted behind cover, adrenaline flooding her veins. The chamber erupted into chaos. Varan's lieutenants drew their weapons, and the sound of pulsing energy blasts filled the room, ricocheting off the walls as Kale and Evelyn scrambled for cover. The Zaraka were relentless, their movements precise and ruthless. Evelyn, focus. Kale shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. We need to disable their defense systems, now. Evelyn nodded, though her heart raced with the urgency of the moment. She ducked low, sprinting across the chamber toward a nearby control panel she had spotted earlier. As she reached it, her mind began to work, the years of scientific training kicking in. The console was heavily encrypted, but she was able to override it with a sequence of commands Kale had taught her earlier. The countdown began. 15 seconds. Evelyn called out, her fingers flying across the interface. Stay low. Kale covered her, firing off shots to keep the Zaraka soldiers at bay. His pulse rifle was a blur, each shot precise, felling their opponents one after another. But it wasn't enough. Their numbers were overwhelming. Evelyn could hear the hiss of energy blasts whizzing by, the loud crack of a shot hitting the wall behind her. 10 seconds. Her fingers flew faster, each moment feeling like an eternity. She could hear Kale's voice over the noise, urging her to finish, to end this before it was too late. He was doing everything he could to protect her, but even Kale wasn't invincible. The odds were stacking against them, and she knew that every second counted. 5 seconds. Her fingers flew over the final command, and then the facility's alarms blared, a high-pitched warning that reverberated throughout the chamber. The entire base shuddered as the energy grid powering the Zaraka's defenses flickered and then failed. The lights overhead flickered, casting a dim, eerie glow over the room as the shields came down. Kale wasted no time. He lunged forward, taking down 2 more of Varan's lieutenants with quick shots. The remaining Zaraka soldiers hesitated for a moment, their defensive systems compromised. It was all the opening they needed. Varan's eyes flashed with fury. You think this will stop me? He spat, his hand moving to a hidden panel on his belt. A loud click echoed through the room, and the floor beneath them rumbled as massive steel doors slammed shut, sealing them inside. Evelyn's heart sank. We're trapped. Kale's eyes widened, but he didn't waste time on panic. He fired once more, hitting the door's lock mechanisms. Not yet. With a deafening crash, the door buckled under the impact, but it didn't give. They were running out of time. Kale? Evelyn shouted, panic creeping into her voice. We need to move, now. Varan's laugh cut through the chaos. You think you can escape? You're not the ones in control here. The Zaraka are everywhere. Before Kale could respond, the ground beneath them rumbled again, this time with more force. The entire facility shook as though something massive was moving beneath them. A low, menacing growl echoed from the depths of the base, a sound that made Evelyn's blood run cold. What the hell is that? Evelyn gasped. Kale's eyes darkened. It's not the Zaraka. We need to get out, now. The floor cracked, and from the shadows emerged a creature. Massive, its eyes glowing an ominous red as it stalked toward them. It was unlike anything Evelyn had ever seen, a monstrous hybrid of mechanical and organic parts. Its limbs were grotesque, its teeth sharp and dripping with an alien venom. Varan's expression shifted to one of cold satisfaction. You're too late, he said, stepping back. Meet Sarkin, my new weapon. The final strike ***. The room was chaos. The enormous creature, Sarkin, loomed in front of them, its glowing red eyes scanning the battlefield with malicious intent. Every step it took sent tremors through the floor, and its monstrous claws scraped against the steel ground, leaving deep grooves in the metal. Its hide, a hybrid of mechanical plating and living flesh, shimmered with an eerie, otherworldly glow. Evelyn's heart raced, her breath shallow as the creature's massive jaws gnashed in her direction. The sound of its growls reverberated through her entire body, and the instinct to run surged through her. But there was nowhere to run. They were trapped in a crumbling facility with a monstrous predator closing in. Kale, she shouted over the noise, her voice shaking. What do we do? Kale's face was set in a grim expression, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. He shifted his weight, taking cover behind a large console, and fired a few quick shots at Sarkin's glowing eyes. But the creature barely flinched, the energy blasts absorbed by its reinforced hide. This isn't going to be enough, Kale muttered. He glanced at Evelyn. We need to use the facility's power grid against it? Evelyn's mind began to turn and she nodded quickly. She remembered the system she'd accessed earlier. If she could reroute the power flow, maybe they could overload Sarkin's cybernetic enhancements. But they had to be fast. "Cover me," she called, her voice steely with determination. Kale didn't hesitate. He moved swiftly, darting out from behind cover and drawing Sarkin's attention with a few well-placed shots. The creature bellowed in fury and turned, lunging toward him with terrifying speed. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She sprinted toward the nearest terminal, fingers flying across the interface as she worked to unlock the power grid systems. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she felt the weight of time pressing down on her. Kale was buying her only a few precious moments. She could hear the sound of Sarkin's heavy footfalls getting closer, its mechanical arms swinging toward Kale. His rifle spat out another round, hitting the creature in the chest, but it was like hitting a wall. The shots barely slowed it down. Sarkin roared, swinging its claw at Kale, narrowly missing him by inches. Evelyn didn't have the luxury of watching. She pushed the terminal to its limits, bypassing security protocols and firewalls that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. "Come on," she muttered under her breath. A warning flashed on the screen, a countdown. It was now or never. She had only a few seconds before the system would overload and cause a chain reaction. But if she timed it wrong, the entire facility could collapse around them. She shot a glance toward Kale, who was still dancing around Sarkin, dodging its strikes with uncanny agility. He was running out of space and the creature was getting angrier by the second. "Evelyn!" Kale shouted, his voice strained. He was on the ground now, scrambling to avoid the crushing blow of Sarkin's foot. "I can't keep this up forever." Evelyn's fingers moved with lightning speed, locking in the final command. The screen flashed red and she took a deep breath. Now? The facility's power grid hummed as the lights above flickered, then flared to life. With a sharp hiss, a surge of energy coursed through the system, redirecting all available power toward the creature's cybernetic enhancements. Sarkin froze for a moment, its glowing red eyes flickering as the overload hit. Its mechanical limbs jerked and spasmed, its once fluid movements stuttering as if it were losing control. The creature howled, a sound of fury and confusion, as the artificial components that had made it such a formidable opponent began to break down. Kale didn't waste any time. He was up on his feet, his weapon raised. He fired rapidly, aiming for the weak points in Sarkin's exposed flesh, its joints, the points where the organic and mechanical parts met. Each shot took out a vital system and the creature staggered, its movements becoming more erratic. Evelyn watched, her heart pounding as Kale's shots seemed to slow Sarkin down. The creature's screech echoed through the room, a sound so primal that it made Evelyn's blood run cold. But it wasn't over. Sarkin wasn't going down without a fight. It let out a final, deafening roar, its claws swinging wildly as it lunged toward Kale, determined to finish what it had started. "No!" Evelyn screamed, instinct taking over. Without thinking, she grabbed the nearest weapon, a discarded pulse gun that had been knocked to the ground during the chaos, and fired directly at Sarkin's head. The blast hit its target with pinpoint accuracy, piercing the creature's skull and sending a cascade of sparks and electrical feedback through its body. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. The creature's eyes dimmed, its body jerking violently as its system short-circuited. Then, with a final horrific shriek, Sarkin collapsed, crashing to the floor with an earth-shattering thud. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she watched the creature's massive body twitch once more before lying still, the glow in its eyes fading to nothing. The room was eerily silent now, save for the crackling of the failing systems and the distant echoes of their struggle. Kale stood panting, his pulse rifle lowered but his eyes scanning the room, alert for any further threats. After a long pause, he finally let out a long breath and turned toward Evelyn, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You did it," he said, his voice rough but filled with genuine admiration. Evelyn was still breathing hard, her heart racing, but the relief was flooding through her. She lowered her weapon slowly, her hands trembling. I couldn't have done it without you," she said quietly, her voice shaky. Kale's smile widened and for a moment the weight of their mission seemed to lift. But the truth was undeniable, they weren't out of danger yet. The Zarqa were still out there and Varan was still alive. "That was a good shot," Kale said, nodding toward her weapon. Evelyn gave a tight smile. "I've had some practice." But the relief was short-lived. A loud crack echoed from deeper within the facility, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Brr. The leader of the Zarqa was not finished yet. The rumble of heavy footsteps grew louder, reverberating through the crumbling facility. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as the sound drew closer, her pulse quickening in response. Cale's face hardened, his hand steadying on his pulse rifle as he scanned the room. The creature they had just taken down had been a monstrous surprise, but now the real enemy was closing in. They had taken down his beast, but the Zaraka leader wasn't someone who would be easily deterred. Evelyn's mind raced, calculating their next move. With the facility's power grid still in disarray and their limited ammo supply, they couldn't afford another fight like the one they had just survived. They needed to outsmart him. Cale glanced over at her, his eyes sharp and focused. "We need to move," he said quietly. "Varan won't be alone. He's too dangerous and we can't let him escape." Evelyn nodded, gripping her weapon tighter. The moment she'd feared was now here. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about stopping the Zaraka, ending Varan's reign of terror once and for all. The sound of footsteps stopped just outside the door. Cale's expression shifted, a hard, determined look settling over his features. He reached for a small device on his belt and tapped a sequence of buttons, activating the base's emergency lockdown. The metal door slammed shut with a deafening sound, the locks clicking into place. "Let's see if that slows him down," Cale muttered under his breath. But even as he spoke, he didn't seem convinced. Varan had always been one step ahead, and it was clear he wasn't going to make this easy. "We've got no choice now but to confront him," Evelyn said, her voice low but filled with resolve. "If we let him go, this entire operation will be for nothing." Cale nodded sharply, moving to a nearby terminal to check the facility's schematics. His fingers flew across the touch interface as he scanned for a way to gain the upper hand. "There's an old weapons vault nearby," he said, his voice grim. "We can arm ourselves with something heavier. But we'll have to go through the main hall to get there." Evelyn's mind whirred. The main hall was a massive expanse, and if Varan had truly reached it, the odds were slim they could avoid him. She glanced back at the reinforced door. Was it enough to stop him? "No time to waste," she said, drawing a deep breath. She had to trust Cale. The stakes were too high and they had already come too far to turn back. With a swift motion, Cale signaled for her to follow, and the two of them began moving cautiously through the corridors. The facility had been built to withstand attacks, but years of neglect had left many of its systems barely functioning. The flickering lights above and the hum of broken machinery added to the tension, making the air thick with a sense of impending danger. Every step felt like it could be their last. As they neared the weapons vault, they heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing from the direction of the main hall. Varan's voice filtered through the walls, smooth and mocking, his words carrying in the stillness of the base. "I know you're here, Cale," he called, his tone laced with amusement. "Did you really think you could hide? Your rebellion is over. You've wasted your time." Cale's expression darkened. He had hoped to surprise Varan, but the leader of the Zaraka had anticipated their every move. It was almost like he knew they would come for him. They reached the weapons vault, the heavy metal door standing between them and the armament they so desperately needed. Cale keyed in the override code, and the door opened with a sharp hiss. Inside, rows of advanced weaponry lined the walls, their sleek designs gleaming in the dim light. "Grab what you can," Cale said quickly, his gaze scanning the selection. "We'll need firepower if we're going to end this." Evelyn didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy-duty plasma rifle, its weight comforting in her hands. She had used weapons like this before during her training, but nothing could prepare her for the sheer intensity of what they were about to face. This wasn't a simulation. This was real. And Varan wasn't just any enemy. Cale took a smaller but powerful blaster, his eyes locking onto hers. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Evelyn didn't reply with words. She nodded once, then moved to the door, peering out into the corridor. The main hall was just ahead. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. There was no turning back now. They had come for Varan, and they would not leave until he was defeated. The door to the main hall slid open with a low groan, and they stepped into the vast space. The hall was bathed in a cold, sterile light, the towering pillars and futuristic architecture serving as a reminder of the power that had once resided here. Now the walls were scarred, the floor littered with debris from the earlier battle. The air was thick with the smell of burning circuitry and ozone, and the silence was broken only by the distant hum of malfunctioning systems. And then from the shadows Varan emerged. His figure was imposing, cloaked in the dark armor that marked him as the leader of the Zaraka. He stood tall, his posture exuding confidence and menace. His eyes, dark and calculating, locked onto Kale and Evelyn as he stepped forward, his voice cold and unyielding. "You really thought you could defeat me?" Varan said, his voice carrying a note of disdain. "You've made a mistake, Kale. And now you'll pay for it." Evelyn tightened her grip on her rifle, her finger hovering over the trigger. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, but she forced herself to stay focused. Varan had underestimated them before, he wouldn't make that mistake again. "We're not here to talk, Varan," Kale said, his voice firm. "This ends now." Varan's lips curled into a smile, but it was more cruel than pleased. "You're in no position to dictate terms, traitor," he sneered. "You will die here, along with your human companion." With that, he raised his hand and the ground beneath their feet trembled. The walls flickered as energy surged and the air grew heavier. It was a trap. Varan had been waiting for them, ready to take them both down in one final strike. But Evelyn was ready. With a quick motion, she fired first, her plasma rifle sending a deadly bolt of energy toward Varan. The shot hit him square in the chest, but his armor absorbed the blast, leaving him unharmed. Varan laughed, a deep, guttural sound that sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. "You can't stop me," he said, his voice a low growl. Kale didn't wait for another taunt. He rushed forward, firing rapidly, his blaster sending high-energy shots toward the leader. But Varan dodged with inhuman speed, his movements too fluid to catch. The battle raged on, each side exchanging shots, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. Kale and Evelyn fought as one, covering each other, moving with precision. Every shot they took, every maneuver they made brought them closer to victory. But they knew it would take everything they had. As Varan swung his blade toward Kale, Evelyn made her move. She dashed to the side, her rifle locked on Varan's exposed flank. She fired. The blast connected with the weak spot in his armor. Varan staggered, his body jerking from the impact. The smile faded from his face as he turned to face her, his expression one of fury. "You will regret that," he snarled. But Evelyn didn't flinch. She knew this was it. This was the moment they'd fought for. With a final, determined shot, she fired once more, this time hitting his power core. The explosion was deafening. Varan's eyes widened in shock as his body was engulfed in the blast. The leader of the Zaraka was no more. Silence fell over the hall as the dust began to settle. Evelyn and Kale stood, breathing heavily, the weight of their victory sinking in. They had done it. The war was over. And for the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe a sigh of relief. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.